Clara Wren, given to a duke far too old, wept silently for the dreams she'd lost. But on their wedding night, his first gift stunned her into a new reality. The bells of St. Alaric told a mournful rhythm as Clara Wren walked down the aisle, her veil trembling like a fragile butterfly's wing. Whispers, soft as the silk of her gown trailing behind her, followed her every step. "Poor child," someone murmured. "Sacrificed to winter while still in bloom." The cathedral itself seemed to breathe with judgment, the stained glass casting cold blue shadows across the stone floor where her slippers made not a sound. Outside, the November fog pressed against the windows, as if even nature wished to shield this union from heaven's gaze. The assembled nobility of 3 counties watched with expressions that ranged from pity to morbid fascination, their fans fluttering open and closed like nervous butterflies. She was only 20, far too young to be bound to a man whose name carried both power and dark rumors. Her father's debts had sealed her fate with the cold efficiency of a merchant's ledger. The white roses in her bouquet seemed to wilt beneath her trembling grasp, their petals falling like abandoned hopes. Each step brought her closer to a future she had never envisioned, a life of duty without passion, of obligation without choice. The ladies of the town exchanged knowing glances, their jewels glittering with cruel satisfaction. "A marriage of convenience," they whispered behind gloved hands. "His third wife and surely his last." A tear threatened to escape her lashes, but Clara held it captive. She would not grant them the spectacle they craved. The Duke of Aldern Vale, Lucien Harrow, stood solemn beneath the altar's shadow, a man with silver hair and eyes the color of a stormy sea. The world whispered that he had outlived love, that his heart was a crypt sealed tight with duty. When he turned to face her, his gaze held no passion, only a quiet resignation that mirrored her own despair. His shoulders, broad beneath immaculate black wool, remained as rigid as marble. At 47, the Duke was not merely older. He was a legend incarnate, a man whose name conjured tales of both immense fortune and profound solitude in equal measure. The candlelight caught the silver at his temples, lending him an air of austere dignity that might have been handsome had it not been so forbidding. "A most advantageous match," Lady Arelle had declared that morning, her voice brittle as she adjusted Clara's veil. "You shall be a duchess." Many would envy such elevation, but Clara's heart had fluttered like a caged nightingale, singing of dreams that would never take flight. She had once imagined love filled with tender glances across crowded rooms, hands that trembled at first touch, whispered promises beneath summer stars. Instead, she found herself promised to a legend, a man whose history was recorded in ledgers rather than love poems. Lady Arelle had pinched her cheek when it grew too pale, demanding color for propriety's sake. "A bride should look alive, not half departed," she had scolded, as though Clara's sorrow were an inconvenient stain upon her new station. Her stepmother's cold whisper still echoed in her mind. "Be grateful he chose you. A girl without dowry or connection has no right to ask for more." The words had cut deeper than any blade, for they carried the sharp edge of truth. After her father's disgrace and subsequent passing, Clara had become but another liability in the household ledger, a mouth to feed, a reputation to salvage. Lady Arelle, with her practiced smiles and calculating eyes, had arranged the match with the efficiency of a general planning a strategic surrender. "The Duke requires an heir," she had explained, her tone suggesting Clara should consider this biological transaction an honor. "And you require security. Let gratitude guide your conduct." Clara spoke her vows through trembling lips, the words tasting of salt and surrender. The Duke's response came measured and deep, like distant thunder rolling across forgotten moors. The congregation watched in silence, some with pity, others with the secret pleasure that often accompanies the misfortunes of others. When the ring slid onto her finger, it felt like a shackle, cold and unyielding. The ancient gold band had adorned the hands of Harrow duchesses for generations, a circle of obligation passing from woman to woman like a silent warning. Clara wondered how many had worn it with joy, and how many with the same quiet desperation that now filled her breast. The weight of it surprised her, Surely such a small thing should not feel so burdensome. He did not touch her when the ceremony ended. His bow was deep, formal, and strangely kind. No kiss sealed their union, only the priest's solemn pronouncement and the heavy book that recorded her passage from maiden to wife. From Clara Wren to the Duchess of Alderaan Vale, a transformation as complete as it was unwanted. The registry's leather-bound pages accepted her signature, a delicate scroll beside his bold hand. The ink seemed to shimmer wetly, as though even it recognized the gravity of what had transpired. She noticed with detached curiosity that her new husband's penmanship revealed a disciplined mind, each stroke precise and controlled, without flourish or hesitation. The carriage carried them through fog and silence, the moonlight painting his profile in shades of sorrow. She noticed the lines around his eyes, not cruel, but carved by years she could not fathom. His hands rested on his walking stick, the signet ring catching the lantern's glow like a solitary star. The distance between them on the velvet seat seemed both insufficient and vast, too close for strangers, too far for those now bound by law and sacrament. Rain began to fall as they passed through the iron gates of London, drops sliding down the carriage windows like the tears Clara refused to shed. The city gave way to countryside, mansions to meadows, civilization to the wild solitude of the moors that surrounded Alderaan Vale. "My lady," he said finally, his voice softer than she had expected. "You need not fear me." The statement hung between them, neither question nor command, but something more complex, almost an offering. Clara studied her gloved hands, uncertain how to respond to kindness when she had steeled herself for coldness. What answer could she give? That she feared not cruelty, but indifference, that the prospect of decades spent in polite estrangement seemed its own particular torture? Instead, she inclined her head slightly, the pearl drops in her ears catching the lantern's glow. But fear was all she knew. Fear and the weight of duty that now bound her to this stranger whose years doubled her own. Alderaan Hall awaited, like a cathedral of memory, vast, breathless, full of things unsaid. Through the gathering darkness, she glimpsed its silhouette against the night sky, a Gothic revival masterpiece of towers and turrets, its windows glowing amber against ancient stone. The carriage wheels crunched on gravel as they approached, the sound oddly final, like the closing of a book. Footmen appeared with lanterns, their faces composed but curious, eager to glimpse their new mistress. The household had assembled in 2 solemn lines to receive them, butler, housekeeper, maids, and footmen, all impeccably arrayed to welcome a bride who arrived more like a prisoner. The portraits of long-dead duchesses followed her with painted eyes as she crossed the grand entrance hall. Each face bore the same serene mask, the same jewels, the same subtle resignation. This is not a home, but a mausoleum, she thought. Fires burned in marble hearths, but their warmth seemed unable to penetrate the chill that emanated from the very walls. A great staircase curved upward into shadow, its banister gleaming with the polish of centuries. Somewhere a clock struck the hour, its chimes echoing through corridors that stretched into darkness. Clara felt herself diminish with each reverberating tone, becoming smaller within the vastness of her new domain. When he spoke again, his voice was steady, cultured, unexpectedly gentle. "You may rest tonight, Lady Harrow. No demands will be made of you." His gaze, when it met hers, held something unreadable. Not kindness exactly, but an absence of unkindness that seemed in that moment almost the same. He gestured to the housekeeper, a woman of formidable dignity, whose steel-gray hair was tucked beneath a pristine cap. "Mrs. Winters will attend to your comfort. Should you require anything, you need only ask." Then, with a bow that spoke of years in the highest circles of society, he withdrew, his footsteps fading into the labyrinthine depths of the manor. She curtsied, unsure if gratitude or dread filled her chest. The servants led her to chambers draped in silk and shadow, where a fire burned low against the autumn chill. Her bridal chamber was a room of golden silence, the bed too vast for comfort, its canopy rising like a ceremonial tent above sheets that gleamed pale and cold in the firelight. The wallpaper bore a pattern of intertwined lilies, their golden stems forming an eternal, inescapable lattice. A dressing table of rosewood stood before the window, its mirror reflecting her pale face and frightened eyes. She looked like a ghost already, haunting rooms that had never known her laughter. She dismissed her maid and sat alone before the mirror, removing the pins from her hair one by one, each falling like the tears she could not shed. Her reflection stared back, a stranger in a duchess's clothing, playing a role for which she had never auditioned. The pearl and diamond tiara that had adorned generations of Harrow brides sat on the velvet cushion before her, its stones glinting with cold fire. She touched it hesitantly, wondering how many women had worn it with joy, and how many with despair. Outside, the wind stirred the branches of ancient elms, their shadows dancing across the walls like spectral warnings. Hours passed. The candles sank low, their flames diminishing as though in sympathy with her spirits. The manor settled into night with creaks and whispers, the sounds of an old house speaking to itself. Clara wrapped herself in a dressing gown of pale silk, its folds whispering against her skin as she moved restlessly from window to fireplace and back again. The night stretched endless before her, the first of countless nights in this gilded cage. She thought of what morning would bring, of duties and expectations, of the marriage bed and all it entailed. Her hands trembled at the prospect, not from maidenly shyness alone, but from the deeper fear of surrendering the last sanctuary of selfhood. The soft knock startled her heart into a dance of panic, the sound echoing in the vast chamber like a pronouncement of doom. Clara stood frozen, her breath caught in her throat, her fingers clutched around a fold of silk. The moment had come, then, the consummation that would seal her fate beyond all hope of escape. She closed her eyes briefly, gathering the tattered remnants of her courage. "Enter," she called, her voice steadier than she had expected. The Duke entered, not with desire in his eyes, but with calm purpose, and placed a small velvet box upon the vanity. "Your first wedding gift," he said, his tone low as a prayer, almost reverent in the stillness. He remained near the door, maintaining a distance that spoke more eloquently than words. In the candlelight, his face seemed younger, the harsh lines of authority softened into something almost vulnerable. He wore a dressing gown of midnight blue, his silver hair catching the light like frost under the moonlight. He bowed once, his eyes unreadable, and left her in the hush of his absence before she could form a response. The door closed with a soft click, leaving Clara alone with the velvet box and the mystery it contained. She stood motionless, caught between relief and bewilderment, the expected ordeal replaced by an enigma she could not decipher. What manner of man was this, who claimed a bride only to grant her solitude? What game did he play that defied all conventions of marriage and duty? Clara's fingers shook as she lifted the lid, her heart thundering in her chest like a wild creature seeking escape. What lay within would reveal her husband's true intentions, his expectations, his demands, the price of her new position. She steeled herself for jewels that would mark her as his possession, or perhaps some token that would instruct her in her duties. The lid rose slowly, revealing its contents in the wavering candlelight. The morning light crept hesitantly through the heavy curtains, finding Clara seated by the window, the velvet box open in her lap. Inside lay a silver key, gleaming beside a folded note sealed with his crest. She had read the words 100 times through the long night, each reading unveiling another layer of understanding. The paper had grown soft with handling, the wax seal carefully preserved despite her repeated examinations. Outside her window, the gardens of Aldrin Hall emerged from the morning mist, their formal patterns softened by autumn's golden touch. A nightingale's solitary song rose from the yew hedge, its notes pure and questioning in the stillness. This key unlocks your own chamber. You are free to close your door or open mine. The choice shall always be yours. No one should be forced to love. The Duke's handwriting flowed across the page in elegant precision, each letter formed with the care of a man accustomed to weighing his words. The ink had blurred beneath her tears, not tears of relief alone, but of wonder. In a world that had treated her as currency, he had offered her choice. The revelation was as startling as spring snow, as unexpected as kindness in a place she had prepared for cruelty. Sleep had eluded her, but exhaustion had given way to a strange clarity. She turned the key over in her palm, feeling its weight, its implications. The metal had warmed to her touch, no longer foreign, but familiar, like a truth one has always known but never articulated. Through the long hours of darkness, she had contemplated this gift and the man who had given it. What wounds had shaped him? What experiences had taught him the value of choice? The silver caught the dawn light, transforming from mere metal to a symbol, from object to promise. Breakfast arrived with a single white camellia upon the tray, its petals perfect against the bone china. The servants moved with quiet efficiency, their glances curious but not unkind. The young maid who arranged her hair watched her in the mirror with barely concealed interest, clearly bursting with questions she dared not ask. Clara allowed herself a small smile at the girl's transparent curiosity. How disappointed she would be to learn that the Duke's chambers remained as distant as the moon. "His Grace dines alone in the mornings, my lady," explained the housekeeper, Mrs. Winters, a woman of dignified years whose eyes had witnessed the passing of duchesses before her. "But he hopes you will join him for tea in the South Garden, should the weather permit." Her tone betrayed nothing, but Clara sensed a depth of knowledge behind the neutral statement. Years of observation crystallized into careful assessment. "The household is at your disposal. His Grace has instructed that you be accorded every courtesy." The manor breathed around her, ancient and watchful. She explored its wings like a ghost, trailing fingers over bookshelves thick with dust, discovering rooms where sunlight had forgotten to visit. Her footsteps echoed in galleries lined with treasures from distant lands. Porcelain from China, tapestries from Persia, marble from Italy. Each artifact spoke of wealth and taste, of a world far beyond the modest circles she had known. The music room stood silent, a grand pianoforte draped in velvet, waiting for fingers that had not touched its keys in years. She lifted the cover and pressed a single note, its clear tone ringing through the emptiness like a question. In the portrait gallery, generations of heroes stared down from gilded frames, men of power and women of grace, all bearing the same storm in their eyes. They watched her progress with painted skepticism. These ancestors who had built a dynasty through strategic alliances and careful breeding. What did they think of her, this penniless girl elevated beyond her station? Did they judge her unworthy of the name she now bore? Or did they recognize in her solitude a reflection of their own? She paused before a portrait of a woman who might have been 30 or 50, her age rendered ambiguous by the artist's flattering brush. The placard identified her as Eleanora Harrow, Duchess of Aldern Vale, 1789 to 1842. Something in her eyes, a certain resigned wisdom, seemed to speak across time. Endure, survive, find your way. The Duke's study remained closed, but the library welcomed her with the scent of leather and parchment. Here she found volumes of poetry, travel accounts, and leather journals filled with precise handwriting, observations of stars, plants, and the passage of seasons. Not the records of a cold man, but of one who watched the world with attention. She selected a volume of Wordsworth, its pages marked with pressed flowers. Violets, primroses, a sprig of lavender. Who had placed them there? A previous duchess, perhaps, or the Duke himself in younger days. The mystery invited her deeper into the house's secrets, each discovery a thread connecting her to its history. Near the window, a telescope stood mounted on a brass tripod, aimed at the heavens. Clara peered through it, finding only daylight, but the instrument spoke of nights spent in contemplation of distant worlds. Beside it lay charts of constellations, annotated in the Duke's hand. Cassiopeia, particularly clear, October 17th. She traced the words, imagining him alone in darkness, finding companionship among the stars when Earth offered none. The thought stirred something unexpected within her, not pity precisely, but a kinship in solitude. Tea in the garden became a ritual, fragile at first, then stronger with each passing day. The south terrace overlooked formal gardens, where late roses struggled against autumn's advance. Silver service gleamed beneath an ancient oak, the table set with delicate china painted with forget-me-nots. The Duke arrived precisely at 4, his clothing immaculate, his manner courteous but distant. He spoke little but listened intently, his eyes following her movements as though memorizing a language he had forgotten. Sometimes a smile would touch his lips when she spoke of books or music, a smile that transformed his face like sunlight breaking through clouds. "The library is quite remarkable," she ventured on the third day, when silence had stretched too thin between them. "I found a volume of astronomical observations. Your work, I presume? A hobby of many years," he acknowledged. "The stars offer constancy in a changing world. And the pressed flowers in the Wordsworth?" Something flickered across his face, surprised perhaps that she had noticed such a detail. "My mother's," he said after a moment. She found poetry in everything. Words, blossoms, even silence. The revelation of this small inheritance, this capacity for seeing beauty, shifted something in Clarara's understanding of him. Here was no cold tyrant, but a man shaped by loss and memory, by passions carefully hidden from casual observation. "You are not what I expected, Your Grace," she ventured one afternoon, when the silence between them had grown comfortable enough for honesty. The October sun cast long shadows across the lawn, burnishing the world in gold and amber. A pheasant called from the distant wood, its cry plaintive against the gathering dusk. "Nor you, my lady," he replied. "I had thought to welcome a duchess. Instead, I find myself in the presence of a woman." His gaze, when it met hers, held no demand, only quiet appreciation. One with thoughts and dreams of her own, if I am not mistaken. The distinction humbled her. She had been prepared for possession, not recognition. Each day brought small discoveries. A book left for her with passages marked, a spray of autumn roses on the pianoforte, a note explaining the history of a painting she had admired. These gestures, neither grand nor ostentatious, spoke of consideration rather than courtship. He sought not to dazzle, but to welcome, to ease her path into a life she had not chosen. She began to watch him in return, the slight furrow between his brows when reading correspondence, the careful way he handled fragile objects, the kindness he showed to the youngest servants. His hands, she noticed, bore the calluses of a man who did not fear labor despite his rank. Once she observed him in the stables, his coat removed, assisting the groom with a distressed mare about to foal. His murmured reassurances to the animal, his steady presence as new life entered the world, revealed more than any formal introduction could have done. Days turned to weeks, and the Duke's distance became its own strange kindness. He dined alone but sent her books, music, and small notes written in his precise, elegant hand. The conservatory contains orchids from Brazil. They bloom today and may interest you. One such note informed her. The first edition of Mrs. Shelley's novel has been placed on your reading table. Her monster and I are old acquaintances. Another read. The dry humor surprised a laugh from her, a sound that startled a passing maid and reminded Clara herself that joy remained possible even here. The manor, once so formidable, began to reveal its secrets. The best views at sunset, the hidden garden where snowdrops bloomed even in winter, the chapel where generations had christened their children. She discovered a collection of music boxes in a forgotten cabinet, each playing a different melody when wound. The housekeeper found her listening to their tinkling songs one rainy afternoon. His Grace's grandmother collected them, Mrs. Winters explained, her customary reserve softening. She claimed they captured happiness in mechanical form, to be released when needed most. Slowly, the house began to breathe again. Clara filled the halls with piano music, soft and hesitant as dawn light through stained glass. The instrument, long neglected, responded to her touch like a creature awakening from hibernation. She played Chopin, Mozart, Bach, composers whose work she had studied in happier days when her father's fortune still allowed for such education. Sometimes the Duke would pause at the doorway, his expression unreadable, listening. He never interrupted, never applauded, but his presence felt like acknowledgement of something shared between them, an appreciation for beauty that required no words. One evening, she found a leather portfolio in her sitting room, with inlay sketches of the grounds, of birds in flight, of hands holding books. His drawings made over decades of solitude. The artistry surprised her, not merely technical skill, but a sensitivity that belied his reserved demeanor. Here was evidence of how closely he observed the world, how deeply he perceived what others overlooked. The gesture of sharing such private work touched her more deeply than any grand gift could have done. That night, she dreamed not of escape but of the man whose loneliness echoed her own, a man who had offered freedom when others had offered only chains. She woke with his face in her mind, not as the imposing Duke of legend, but as the solitary artist who watched stars and pressed flowers between pages of poetry. For the first time since coming to Alderaan Hall, she wondered not how to endure her situation, but how to transform it. The silence between them became a language neither had known how to speak, but both were learning to understand. One stormy evening, with thunder rolling over the moors, Clara found him in the library alone by the fire. Her mind raced, thoughts battering against the windows like insistent memories clamoring to be let in, while the room was punctuated by brief, spectral flashes of lightning. The leather-bound books that lined the walls seemed to absorb all the sound, crafting a quiet sanctuary against the storm's increasing wrath. A chessboard, its pieces frozen mid-strategy, sat abandoned on a side table, as if the game itself had been interrupted by some urgent matter. The faint scent of pipe tobacco still hung in the air, a ghostly reminder of a habit recently abandoned, perhaps given up at her approach. He stood with his back to her, his shoulders straight but bearing the weight of the world, an untouched glass of amber liquid held loosely in his hand. The firelight painted deep shadows beneath his eyes, peeling back the layers of his title to reveal the vulnerable man beneath. Stripped of the formal attire he wore for his daily obligations, dressed simply in his shirt sleeves and waistcoat, he seemed both more vulnerable and somehow more real, more substantial. His silver hair caught the dancing firelight, transformed from a simple mark of age into a distinguished crown of wisdom. The signet ring gleamed on his finger, a symbol of the authority that had once intimidated her, now just another accessory on the man she was coming to know. He looked older than his years, his eyes haunted by secrets that refused to stay buried. Yet, despite the weariness etched on his face, there was an undeniable strength in his stillness, a quiet power that commanded respect rather than fear. Clara hesitated at the threshold, unsure whether to intrude on this private, almost sacred moment. Her slippers made no sound as she crossed the Turkish carpet, but something, perhaps a subtle shift in the air, a change in the very energy of the room, alerted him to her presence. He didn't turn right away, allowing her a moment to retreat if she chose. When she didn't, he squared his shoulders, as if preparing to once again don the mantle of the Duke. "You freed me," she whispered, the words tumbling out before she could fully consider their implications. "But you still live in chains." He turned, clearly surprised by her courage, her presence, the profound understanding he heard in her voice. For a fleeting moment, his carefully constructed composure faltered, giving her a glimpse of the raw, vulnerable man he kept carefully hidden. His eyes widened almost imperceptibly. His lips parted as if he were about to speak, then pressed together again. The glass in his hand trembled almost imperceptibly, the amber liquid inside catching the firelight like bottled sunlight. "My chains were forged long before you," he murmured finally, each word measured, as if extracted at great cost. "Then let me share their weight," she said softly, taking a step closer. The boldness of her own words surprised her, yet they felt undeniably right, even necessary, in the intimate space created by the firelight and the raging storm outside. She had come to Alderaan Hall as property, expecting to be claimed, possessed. Instead, she had been granted her personhood, allowed to be herself. The realization had transformed her, igniting a newfound courage in her where once there had only been resignation. Her hand hovered tentatively over his arm, offering comfort, companionship. He didn't move away, didn't flinch. The fire cast them both in shifting patterns of gold and shadow, illuminating their faces, their hands, their intertwined fates. Time seemed to suspend, hanging suspended in the air between heartbeats. Outside, a bolt of lightning split the sky, briefly bathing the room in stark, almost blinding light before plunging it back into the intimate darkness. The moment stretched between them, as fragile and delicate as spun glass, yet as undeniably powerful as the storm raging beyond the windows. Clara felt her heart pounding against her ribs, a wild thing desperate for connection. What madness was this, that she should reach for the very fate she had once dreaded, the one she had spent her life trying to avoid. Yet the man before her was not the monstrous ogre of her imagination, but something far more complex, a soul as isolated and solitary as her own. "I did not wish to trap you," he confessed. His voice so low she had to lean closer to hear him above the drumming rain. "I have seen too many women wither beneath the crushing weight of duty's yoke. Your father offered your hand, and I accepted, knowing I could at least spare you from fates far worse." The admission hung between them, stripped bare of any pretense, honest and unadorned. No flowery sentiment, no empty promises, just the plain truth of his intentions, laid bare for her judgment. "And what of your fate, sir?" she asked, finding courage in his surprising honesty. "To live forever in solitude?" The question carried no accusation, only genuine curiosity about the path he had deliberately chosen. Had he truly resigned himself to a life only half-lived, surrounded by rooms filled with treasures but utterly empty of companionship? Had he somehow managed to convince himself that such an existence was preferable to the potential pain and risk of true connection? For the first time, she saw a flicker of warmth behind the winter ice in his gaze, a thawing that seemed to subtly transform his entire countenance. The formidable barriers of age and circumstance seemed to waver, like mist dissipating before the sunrise, revealing not the intimidating duke of society's whispers, but a man, complex and wounded perhaps, but undeniably capable of feeling. "I have grown accustomed to my own company," he said, but his voice betrayed the lie, his words ringing hollow. The statement sounded like a well-worn phrase, a practiced line that had long ago lost its power to convince even its speaker. He set his glass aside, the amber liquid still untouched, and turned to face her fully. In the soft glow of the firelight, the years that separated them seemed to matter less than the profound understanding that had grown in the shared silence of their time together. His eyes studied her face with an almost painful intensity, as though he were trying to memorize a landscape he might never see again, noting each small feature with careful, deliberate attention. "Clara," he said, her name a tremor in the quiet room, intimate in a way no formal address could ever be. "You owe me nothing." "Then let me give freely," she whispered, the words rising from some deeper place than conscious thought. "My choice is mine now." She extended her hand, palm upward, not in supplication or servitude, but in an offering of herself, her very being. The gesture required no explanation, its meaning crystal clear across all barriers of language and custom. Here was trust, freely given, without expectation of return. Here was connection, willingly sought, without fear of consequence. He closed his eyes, as if her words were a blinding light, too precious to be examined directly, too fragile to be exposed to the harsh glare of reality. His breath came in short, uneven gasps, the careful composure he had cultivated for weeks momentarily abandoned, shattering like glass. The firelight seemed to tremble and dim. Rain whispered against the window panes like secrets exchanged in the darkness of night. When he opened his eyes again, she saw something new, something unguarded, living there within him. Hope as fragile and delicate as a bird's wing, yet as undeniably powerful as the storm that raged beyond the windows. "You are the first light this house has seen in years," he said, the words emerging with the weight of a confession, the burden of a long-held secret finally released. This was no practiced courtesy, no empty social nicety, but raw, vulnerable truth, spoken from the heart. His hand, when it finally reached for hers, trembled slightly before steadying, finding its strength. The touch was tentative at first, then grew firm, the contact of equals, not of master and possession. She smiled, tears glimmering in her eyes. Then let me stay until the shadows forget their names. The poetry of the phrase surprised her, yet it perfectly captured the transformation she had undergone, from an unwilling bride forced into a loveless marriage to a woman actively choosing her own destiny. No longer was Alderaan Hall a gilded cage to be endured, but a sanctuary to be embraced, not for its opulent grandeur, but for the solitary soul who had granted her freedom when the world had offered only chains. His hand, weathered but gentle, reached for hers. Their fingers intertwined, a bridge spanning years and circumstance. The storm outside faded to a gentle murmur as he bent his head, his lips brushing her palm in a gesture of reverence, almost worship. The touch was as light as butterfly wings, yet it sent a rush of warmth cascading through her veins like a summer rain, refreshing and renewing. This was no demand, no act of claiming, only a gentle acknowledgement of the fragile connection forming between them. "I never dared to hope," he confessed, the words barely audible above the crackling fire. The admission revealed volumes about the life he had led, the profound solitude he had accepted as inevitable, what hidden sorrows had taught him to expect so little, what painful disappointments had schooled him in the art of living without. She reached into her pocket and took out the key, the one she had carried with her every day since their wedding night. The silver had warmed against her body heat, transformed from a symbol of separation and imprisonment to a token of choice, a sign of her own agency. "You gave me freedom when the world gave me fear," she whispered, holding the metal between them so that it caught the dancing firelight. "Now I choose to remain." The statement contained no conditions, no secret bargains, only the simple, unadulterated truth of a heart finding its own path. He took the key from her hand, turned it once, and placed it carefully on the mantel. "No more locks," he murmured. "Not between us." The gesture carried a deep, almost ritual significance, a physical manifestation of the emotional barriers that were crumbling between them. The key gleamed against the dark marble, a relic of what had been, not what would be. Outside, the storm softened, the thunder fading into the gentle patter of rain, like two hearts relearning how to beat in unison. The library cocooned them in warmth and shadow, sheltering their fragile new understanding from the world's harsh judgment. Bookbindings gleamed like hidden jewels in the firelight, ruby, emerald, sapphire, silent witnesses to this profound moment of transformation. He reached for her, not as a master claiming what was his, but as a man yearning for connection. She came willingly, resting her head against his chest, his hand steady at her back. The firelight bathed them in a warm, golden glow, two wounded souls finally finding warmth and comfort in each other's presence. His heartbeat echoed softly beneath her ear, steady and strong, no longer a stranger's rhythm, but a sound that was becoming familiar, comforting, necessary. His fingers traced gentle patterns on her shoulder, as soft as the rain now falling gently beyond the windows. No words passed between them, none being adequate to express the profound shift that had occurred, not merely a physical proximity, but the alignment of two solitudes that had been maintained for far too long. He bent his forehead to hers, his breath warm against her skin. "Tell me this isn't a dream," he whispered, vulnerability naked in his voice. How many lonely nights had he spent alone in this house? How many mornings had he awakened to empty rooms and hollow ceremony? The question revealed the young boy still living within the Duke, the heart still capable of wonder despite years of carefully cultivated restraint. "If it is," she breathed, her words warm against his skin, "let neither of us wake." Her hands found his face, tracing the lines and contours that time had carved there, not with regret for his years, but with a deep appreciation for the wisdom they had brought. Age was not the enemy she had once feared, but simply another facet of the complex, multifaceted man before her. A man who had offered her choice when the world had only given commands. The kiss that followed was not one of passion claimed, but of peace discovered, slow, reverent, eternal. His fingers traced her face with the delicate care of one who had forgotten gentleness, and was now rediscovering it with wonder. Her arms encircled him, not out of duty or obligation, but out of a choice freely given. The moment held no urgency, only the gradual, unfolding recognition of two souls finding safe harbor after weathering separate storms. Beyond the windows, the dawn broke pale and tender, gilding their faces with forgiveness. The rain had ceased during the night, leaving the world washed clean, ready for new beginnings. Morning light filtered through the ancient glass panes, painting intricate patterns across the Turkish carpet where they stood, still embracing, reluctant to break the spell of understanding that had enveloped them through the long hours of darkness. And in Alderaan Hall, once haunted by silence and shadows, love finally learned to speak, not in grand declarations or passionate demands, but in the quiet, almost imperceptible language of choice freely made and connection freely sought. Years passed, and the manor bloomed again, revitalized by love and companionship. Gardens once neglected flourished under Clarara's devoted care, bursting with color and life. Rooms that had been sealed off for years were now open to sunlight and laughter, filled with warmth and joy. The Duke walked the grounds with a lighter, more confident step, his silver hair gleaming in the sun as he walked beside his young wife, her honey-brown dresses a vibrant contrast to the muted tones of the ancient stone. The years that separated them, once a seemingly insurmountable chasm, had become merely a difference of perspective, his vast experience complementing her youthful freshness, her boundless hope tempering his ingrained caution. In the third spring of their marriage, a daughter was born, a tiny beacon of light in their lives. They named her Eleanor, in honor of the grandmother whose portrait had first spoken to Clarara's heart, offering silent comfort and guidance. The child brought a new dimension to Alderaan Hall, her joyous laughter echoing through the galleries and hallways where once only silence had dwelled. The Duke, to the astonishment of longtime servants, could often be found in the nursery, telling fantastical stories of distant stars and faraway lands, while his daughter's small hand clasped his finger with unwavering trust. Society whispered still, but the tone of the whispers had changed, shifting from pity and judgment to wonder and admiration. Those who visited Alderaan Hall found not the tragedy they had expected, but a vibrant, thriving household where mutual respect had kindled something rare and precious. They witnessed the Duke's eyes following his Duchess with quiet, understated devotion, and her radiant smile whenever he entered a room, small, almost imperceptible gestures that spoke volumes about the depth of their connection. The gossipy tongues of the ton, ever hungry for scandal and misfortune, found instead a love story that defied their expectations, not a passionate drama of youth meeting youth, but the slower, deeper, more enduring connection of two souls who had recognized their match across all the seemingly insurmountable barriers of age and circumstance. "Most extraordinary," remarked Lady Pembroke to her companion at a summer garden party. "One would almost think she had chosen the match herself, the way she looks at him." The observation contained a mixture of admiration and disappointment. Admiration for a happiness achieved against all odds, and disappointment at being denied the spectacle of misery they had all so eagerly anticipated. Lady Arelle visited once, her face pinched with a mixture of curiosity and thinly veiled envy. She found Clarara in the conservatory, arranging white camellias with steady, practiced hands. The flowers had become a sort of tradition between husband and wife, his thoughtful gift on each anniversary, a delicate reminder of their unlikely beginnings. "I simply cannot comprehend it," Lady Arelle declared, scrutinizing Clarara's contentment as if she were searching for a hidden flaw. Her eyes darted from the elegant surroundings to the simple gold band that had replaced the imposing ancestral ring on Clarara's finger. "You seem almost happy in this arrangement." Clarara merely smiled, touching a perfect bloom with gentle fingers. The delicate petals yielded slightly to her touch, resilient despite their apparent fragility. "Not almost, madam," she replied, her voice clear and steady. "Completely." The simplicity of the statement offered no opening for argument. no chink in the armor through which doubt or disapproval might enter. 3 years had transformed the frightened girl into a confident woman secure in her own judgment, unburdened by the opinions and incomprehension of others. The Duke found them there, his entrance as quiet and unobtrusive as always. He bowed to Lady Arelle with impeccable courtesy, then turned to Clara, his gaze softening with the look that belonged only to her, a glance of such complete and unwavering understanding that it required no words to supplement it. "The gardens await your inspection, my dear," he said, offering her his arm with a gentle smile. The gesture was commonplace, unremarkable, yet it contained a world of meaning, a secret language apparent only to those who had learned to read the subtle cues of shared glances and the significance of small, tender touches. They walked together beneath the ancient oaks, their pace unhurried and relaxed. Sunlight dappled the path before them, creating intricate patterns of gold and shadow on the gravel. Birds called from the branches overhead, their melodious songs providing a harmonious counterpoint to the gentle rhythm of their synchronized footsteps. "She cannot understand," Clara observed quietly, her hand resting lightly upon his sleeve. The touch was casual yet intimate, the familiar contact of two people who had moved beyond the constraints of formality into the comfort of true companionship. "Few can," he replied, his voice warm with private amusement. "True choice is far rarer than diamonds." His eyes, when they met hers, held the wisdom of years and the wonder of newfound discovery, an alchemical combination that had transformed obligation into devotion, arrangement into deep affection. The lines at the corners of his eyes deepened when he smiled, a sight once rare and fleeting, but now commonplace in the halls of Alderaan Hall. That evening, as autumn painted the skies in vibrant hues of amber and rose, they stood together on the terrace, enjoying the quiet beauty of the fading day. Eleanor had been tucked into bed with whispered stories and gentle kisses, her small world complete and secure, in a way Clara's had never been at that age. The key that had once symbolized their separate chambers now hung in the library, a cherished ornament rather than a dreaded necessity, a poignant reminder of where they had begun, not of where they had arrived. Their hands met, their fingers intertwining with the comfortable ease of two hearts that had finally found their home. "I was given to a duke far too old," she whispered, resting her head against his shoulder. The words contained no resentment or regret, only a gentle acknowledgement of the long and winding journey they had traveled together. "But in his gift, I found my freedom." The paradox no longer confused her, the realization that true liberty had come not from escape, but from choosing to remain, that real connection had grown not from the fleeting flame of passionate infatuation, but from the steady, unwavering light of mutual respect. He smiled, the years that separated them dissolving beneath the warmth of shared understanding. "And I," he murmured, his voice steady with newfound certainty, "who thought that time had stolen all joy, discovered that love comes not from possession or control, but from surrender." His arm encircled her waist, drawing her closer as the evening chill began to descend. Above them, the first stars began to appear, twinkling against the darkening sky. The same stars he had catalogued in solitude for so many years, now shared with eyes that saw their beauty anew. The sunset bathed them in a golden light, two souls bound not by duty or obligation, but by conscious choice, the rarest and most precious gift of all. Behind them, lights began to glow warmly in the windows of Alderaan Hall, transforming the ancient stone from a forbidding fortress into a welcoming haven. Servants moved quietly and efficiently, lighting fires against the approaching autumn evening, drawing curtains against the gathering night, the humble yet essential rituals of home continuing, creating the comforting framework within which life unfolded. For in the quiet, echoing halls of Alderaan Hall, where once only silence had resided, a profound truth was being written in every shared glance and every gentle touch. When love is offered without demand or expectation, even the most wounded heart may find the courage to bloom. The discovery was neither dramatic nor sudden, but gradual and gentle, like the slow unfolding of dawn. The quiet revelation that connection freely chosen far outshines any bond forged by obligation alone. And though the world might never fully understand their unique tale, It remained etched in every breath they shared, a testament to the power of the human heart. A story of fear transformed to freedom, and freedom transformed to love. Not the fleeting, passionate infatuation of ballads and poems, but something far rarer and more enduring. A profound companionship built on mutual choice, sustained by unwavering respect, and deepened by the daily discovery of joy in shared moments of quiet silence. As night fell complete around them, they turned toward home, toward the warmth of the hearth, toward the life they had consciously created, not from the cold demands of duty, but from the quiet, powerful force of choice. And in that moment, beneath the watchful gaze of stars that had witnessed centuries of human struggle and triumph, they walked not as Duke and Duchess, not as husband and wife bound by social contract, but simply as two souls who had found, against all expectation, the courage to choose each other again and again, day after day, in the sacred, ordinary moments that together create a life truly worth living. In this they had discovered the most profound truth of all, that love's greatest power lies not in possession or control, but in liberation and acceptance. That its deepest and most enduring expression comes not in claiming another, but in the daily, conscious choice to remain, to cherish, and to grow together, side by side.